April 8, 1943, Seattle, Washington. Inside Boeing Plant 2. The air was thick with the metallic scent of oil, paint, and hot rivets. The rhythmic hammering of pneumatic tools echoed through the cavernous assembly hall as hundreds of workers, most of them women, moved in perfect coordination along the skeletal frames of America's most important bomber, the B-17 Flying Fortress. Rows of gleaming silver fuselages stretched as far as the eye could see. Sparks flew from welding torches, the clatter of wrenches mixed with the steady hiss of air compressors, and somewhere in the background, Glenn Miller played faintly from a dusty radio perched on a tool cart. Among the sea of overalls and bandanas stood Evelyn Parker, a 22-year-old assembly line worker. Her hair was tied up in the signature Rosie the Riveter style, practical and proud. She had been with Boeing for nearly a year, tightening bolts and securing fittings along the fuel systems of B-17 wings. It was repetitive, meticulous work. Every piece mattered. Every part, life or death. That morning, Evelyn reached for a tray of bolts freshly delivered from the supply department. They looked identical to the hundreds she'd handled before, same sheen, same size. But when she slid one into the threaded hole on a fuel line mount, it resisted. Not by much. Just a hair tighter than usual. Most workers might have forced it, shrugged, and moved on. Production quotas were brutal, each section had to meet hourly numbers. The war didn't wait for perfection. But Evelyn had been trained by her supervisor, Jack Morrison, a gruff yet fair foreman who drilled one rule into everyone's head: if it doesn't feel right, don't pass it. Evelyn frowned, rolling the bolt between her fingers. It looked standard, but something about the threads caught the light differently. She grabbed her caliper gauge, the simple measuring tool dangling from her tool belt, and checked the diameter. It was off by a fraction of a millimeter, barely noticeable, but enough to damage the fitting. She hesitated. If she reported it, she might hold up the entire section's workflow. Production had already fallen behind schedule after a shipment delay from Wichita. Supervisors were on edge. A misplaced complaint could be seen as slowing the war effort. But Evelyn couldn't shake the thought: this bolt went directly into the fuel line assembly, the same line that carried high-octane aviation fuel from the tank to the engines. If it stripped the thread or failed under pressure, she didn't want to imagine what could happen 20,000 feet above the Atlantic. She turned to her station partner, Helen Ruiz, another young woman from San Diego, and whispered, "These bolts, something's wrong. They don't fit clean." Helen looked up, wiping grease from her fingers. "It's probably just a new batch. They change suppliers all the time." "Yeah, but look." Evelyn handed her the bolt. "Threads are finer. See?" Helen squinted, then shrugged. "Looks fine to me. We've got a quota to hit, Ev." Evelyn looked down the line. Mechanics were already installing the same bolts across the wing frames. By the time she finished her shift, dozens of B-17s could be sealed up and shipped out, each with those same components buried deep within their structure, invisible once riveted closed. She felt her stomach tighten. She couldn't ignore it. Evelyn flagged her section supervisor. "Mr. Morrison? Can I show you something real quick?" Morrison approached, his brow furrowed. "What's the hold-up?" She explained, quietly, carefully, trying not to sound uncertain. He took the bolt, examined it, then frowned deeper. "You sure you didn't grab the wrong bin?" "No, sir. All these came from the same box. Look, every one of them measures slightly off." He tested another. Then another. Each one was the same. Within minutes, Morrison had ordered the line paused, a rare and serious decision. Workers groaned as drills fell silent. A foreman from quality control was called in, clipboard in hand, clearly irritated. "What's this about?" he barked. Morrison handed over the bolt. Parker found a threading mismatch in the new batch from Lincoln Supply. The inspector raised an eyebrow. Lincoln? They're certified. We've been using their parts for months. Then they might have sent us a bad run. Morrison crossed his arms. If these go in the fuel system, we're talking potential leaks. The inspector sighed. You're holding up production over a hunch. Evelyn spoke up, softly, but firm. It's not a hunch, sir. The diameter's wrong by a 16th. I've been installing these for 11 months. I can feel when something's off. Her voice carried just enough conviction to silence the argument. The inspector finally said, "Fine. Pull the lot for testing." They gathered every bolt from the shipment, thousands of them, and sent them to the metallurgical lab for analysis. The line resumed hours later with replacement parts from a previous batch, but the disruption was enough to ripple through the plant. Some whispered that Evelyn had overreacted, others said she'd done the right thing. 3 days later, the results came back, and confirmed her worst fear. The Lincoln bolts were out of specification, not just in thread size but in heat treatment. They hadn't been tempered to handle the vibration and fuel pressure of a B-17's operation. Under stress, they could shear or loosen, causing leaks in the pressurized fuel system. The investigation expanded quickly. Over 300 aircraft had already been fitted with bolts from that same defective batch, now scattered across assembly plants and airbases from Seattle to Kansas. If Evelyn hadn't spoken up, hundreds of flying fortresses might have taken off across the Atlantic, each carrying 12 men, 12 parachutes, and a bomb load of high explosives, with a fatal weakness hidden deep inside. A single, wrong bolt could have turned every one of them into a fireball. And all of it, every life saved, every plane spared, traced back to a single moment of doubt in one young woman's hands. April 12, 1943, Boeing Field, Seattle. A thin morning mist rolled across the tarmac as the investigation team gathered near a half-completed B-17. The vast hangar smelled of solvent and burnt metal, but this morning, it also carried the sharp tang of tension. Engineers, inspectors, and military liaisons huddled around a workbench piled high with defective bolts. At the center of the commotion stood Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Keene, an Army Air Forces liaison assigned to Boeing's production oversight. His uniform was immaculate, but his expression was grim. "So, you're telling me 300 flying fortresses could have fuel systems ready to rupture mid-flight because of this?" he asked, holding up one of the tiny bolts between gloved fingers. Chief Engineer Harold Denton nodded. "Yes, sir. The heat treatment's inconsistent. The threads are undersized, and the tensile strength's nearly 20% below spec. At altitude, under vibration, these could shear clean off." Keene exhaled, his jaw tightening. Good God. On the table lay 2 sample assemblies, one with the correct bolt, the other with the defective type. Technicians had simulated flight conditions in the lab, subjecting them to heat, pressure, and vibration. The defective bolts failed within hours. If installed, they would have caused slow leaks along the B-17's fuel lines, tiny, almost invisible leaks that would only reveal themselves once the aircraft climbed into the freezing, low-pressure air above Europe. The leaked fuel could spray across the engine nacelles, where exhaust manifolds burned white-hot. One spark, one flare, and the bomber would turn into a flying torch. Keene set the bolt down and turned toward Denton. "Trace the entire batch. Every plane, every plant. I want serial numbers, delivery logs, the lot." "Yes, sir. We've already started contacting Wichita, Cheyenne, and Vega plants." But, Denton hesitated. "Sir, some of these aircraft have already been delivered to the 8th Air Force in England." Keene froze. "Delivered?" "Yes, sir. We estimate around 80 units, maybe more, were shipped with Lincoln bolts in their fuel assemblies. Those planes could already be flying combat missions." For a moment, the sound of drills and riveters beyond the hangar faded into the background. The enormity of the situation hit them all at once. Keane finally spoke, voice low and deliberate. "Get me a secure line to right field. We're grounding every fortress that came from those plants until further notice." Across the Atlantic, in a rain-soaked airfield outside Bassingbourn, England, ground crews were already prepping B-17s for another bombing raid over occupied France. The flying fortresses of the 91st Bomb Group stood in neat rows, engines rumbling, crews climbing aboard with flak vests and thermos bottles of coffee. Then, the order came down, an abrupt halt. All takeoffs cancelled. Aircraft inspection teams inbound. Confused airmen watched as maintenance officers swarmed their planes, opening access panels and dismantling fuel systems. The mechanics worked through the night, replacing every suspect bolt they found. Some crews grumbled at the delay, unaware that these tiny pieces of metal might have been the difference between returning home or vanishing in a fireball over the channel. By dawn, the truth spread quietly through the maintenance bays. Some woman, back in the States had caught the mistake. No one knew her name, but the rumor spread fast: a riveter at Boeing saved our hides. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Evelyn Parker had no idea of the scale of what she had uncovered. She'd gone back to work as usual, keeping her head down while inspectors tore through every storage bin in the plant. Her co-workers whispered about the Bolt scare, some blaming her for slowing production, others calling her a hero behind her back. Then, one afternoon, Morrison appeared at her station. He wasn't smiling, but his tone was different. Respectful. "Parker, you're wanted in the office," he said. Evelyn's heart pounded. She wiped her hands on her overalls and followed him upstairs to the administrative wing, a place most workers never went. Inside, she found Colonel Keane himself standing beside the plant manager. The colonel looked stern but not unkind. "You're Miss Parker?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment, then said, "You may not realize it, but your attention to detail likely saved several hundred airmen. We found the same defect in every shipment Lincoln sent out this month." Evelyn blinked. "Several hundred?" Keane nodded. "Over 300 B-17s were affected. We caught it in time because of you." She didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened. All she could manage was, "I just thought something felt wrong." "That instinct," Keane said, "is the difference between good workers and great ones." He handed her a typed letter, stamped with the Army Air Force's insignia. It was an official commendation for exceptional diligence in the interest of national security. No newspaper would ever print her name. No medal would ever hang from her chest. But in that moment, Evelyn understood, the war wasn't just being fought in the skies, it was being won in places like this, by people like her. That night, as she walked home past the factory gates, she looked up at the distant sound of aircraft engines echoing across the Seattle sky. Somewhere, far away, a bomber crew might be returning safely because she'd refused to ignore a wrong bolt. And in the quiet hum of the city, she smiled to herself, just a little. May 1943, across the United States. Factories never slept. Day and night, the rhythmic pounding of rivet guns, the buzz of welding arcs, and the thunder of assembly lines became the soundtrack of America's war machine. But behind that industrial roar was another kind of battle, one fought not with bullets or bombs, but with precision, discipline, and a sense of duty that ran deeper than anyone could see. Evelyn Parker had become a quiet legend among her peers, though she never asked for it. The Bolt incident, as engineers now called it, had triggered a sweeping review of every subcontractor supplying parts to Boeing. Entire shipments were rechecked, inspection protocols rewritten, and quality control tightened across multiple states. The revelation was sobering. The U.S. war effort, vast, unstoppable, and industrially unmatched, was still vulnerable to the smallest human error. At Wright Field, Ohio, the Air Technical Service Command compiled the full report. The findings were alarming. Lincoln Supply, the subcontractor responsible for the faulty bolts, had switched to a cheaper alloy in an attempt to meet surging demand. The new metal passed superficial checks but failed under stress. Combined with a minor miscalibration in their threading machines, it produced thousands of substandard fasteners, all stamped, boxed, and shipped with official approval tags. It was a perfect storm of pressure, fatigue, and bureaucracy. Nobody had meant to cut corners, the system was simply running faster than its safeguards could keep up. The report's cover page bore a stark title: Potential Catastrophic Failure in Fuel System Assemblies, Immediate Corrective Action Required. That document would quietly change how American aircraft were built for the rest of the war. Back in Seattle, Evelyn's days returned to routine, but something in her had changed. She began attending night classes offered by the company, learning about aircraft systems and blueprint reading. Morrison encouraged her. "You've got an engineer's brain," he told her one evening as they stood overlooking the factory floor. "Don't waste it on the line forever." She smiled faintly. "I like the line. It feels real. Every part one touch goes somewhere, does something." "Yeah," Morrison said, lighting his pipe. "And sometimes it saves the whole damn war effort." Elsewhere, far from the humming plants of America, the ripple effect of Evelyn's discovery was felt in silence. Over Europe, bomber crews from the 91st, 303rd, and 305th Bomb Groups flew deep into enemy territory, Berlin, Bremen, Schweinfurt, trusting their machines with their lives. The B-17 was their fortress in the sky, its rugged design a lifeline amid flak bursts and Messerschmitt fighters. Fuel lines didn't leak. Engines didn't flame out mid-air. Each mission that returned safely carried within it the unseen fingerprints of thousands of factory workers, and one woman who refused to ignore a loose thread in the chain of perfection. Some pilots heard whispers about her. A nameless, factory girl whose sharp eyes had caught a flaw that could have ended them all. One flight engineer, Sergeant Bill Halvorsen, would later write in his journal after returning from a raid over Hamburg. "They say some girl back home stopped bad bolts from getting into our ships. Don't know who she is, but I owe her a beer, or maybe my life." June 1943, the recognition that never was. When Boeing's plant manager tried to nominate Evelyn for a public commendation, the Army declined. Officially, it was to protect classified production details; unofficially, the military didn't publicize factory errors, even ones heroically caught. Evelyn didn't mind. She still clocked in each morning at 6 a.m., still tied her hair up, still tightened every fitting with the same steady hands. She knew what she'd done, even if the world didn't. But one afternoon, she found something unexpected waiting at her workstation, a folded note, unsigned, tucked beneath her wrench. "To the girl who stopped the Firebirds from burning, thank you. 91st Bomb Group." Attached was a small piece of metal, a flattened, blackened bolt fragment, likely from a fortress that had returned from combat. She held it in her hand for a long time, the weight of it small but heavy with meaning. That night, she placed it on her windowsill, beside the letter from Colonel Keane. It stayed there for the rest of her life. In the years after the war, historians would write volumes about generals, admirals, and presidents, about the tanks that rolled through Normandy and the planes that leveled the Reich. But few would ever mention Evelyn Parker or the countless others like her, whose vigilance on the factory floor made those victories possible. And yet, in every museum that displays a restored B-17 today, in every rivet, every polished wing, her legacy lives quietly, the invisible guardian of men who never knew her name. Because sometimes, victory isn't won by the ones who fly the bombers, but by the ones who make sure they don't fall from the sky.